All right, guys, this is a big day. I never thought I'd be going down this route, but today we're going to be talking about the SmartCarb and specifically about the SmartCarb on the YZ125. 2024 YZ125, we know that from 2022 onward, there are some jetting issues with the YZ125. Runs really rich on the low end, runs lean on the high end, on the top end, and you know, people fiddle around with the jetting trying to get it right. Now, you'll also know if you've been following me on my YZ125 build that I put a JD jetting kit in my stock carburetor. So why would I want a SmartCarb? The JD jetting kit resolved the jetting issues. However, when I started doing the research on the SmartCarb, right, I found that there was a lot of at least manufacturer claims around this carb that I couldn't resist and couldn't pass up. So I'm going to tell you why I invested in this carburetor, what I'm expecting out of it, and then we're going to install it and talk a little bit more about the details of the SmartCarb. Okay, so before we really get into it, let's talk about some of the real significant differences between the stock carb and the SmartCarb. Now, of course, the color and the look of this thing is just awesome, but before we talk about that, here is your traditional carburetor. This is straight off the 2024 YZ125. All right, and really, there's a few things you need to know. All right, when you order one of these, first of all, when you order a SmartCarb, you really need to make sure you get this connector right. Now, this connector is for the throttle position sensor, or the TPS, right? And the TPS is basically right here. And it uses a little cam follower on the slide to provide feedback to the ignition system on the throttle position. So it alters the timing or whatever it does, fancy there, to give you that input. Now, when you order the SC2 SmartCarb, it has an option called the mag volt. And this is the mag volt right here. And it basically performs the same function as the throttle position sensor, the TPS. Now, you have to get this right. This is what you have to order. Now, I'll unwrap this in a minute, but basically this connector right here is what they call a Type 8 connector, which matches this, right? So I can plug this straight in to my stock YZ125 wiring, right? So Type 8 connector, super important if you get the mag volt option. Now, just so you know, the mag volt option costs a little bit more than a JD jetting kit for the stock carburetor, just to put things in perspective, all right? So there's another wire on here, and this is for your, basically your power jet, and the power jet essentially is in the back here, right? This is the power jet down in here, this little nozzle, and the power jet basically just kicks in at a higher RPM, right? And of course there is no power jet on a SmartCarb, right? So that wire, this wire here, just doesn't get hooked up. So on the YZ, that'll just be an open connection, and we'll hook up the mag volt to the stock connector when we install this. So when you go to order a SmartCarb, there's a few things that you need to tell them that are important. All right, number one, you got to give them the right connector type if you got a throttle position sensor, which we just talked about. For the 2024 YZ125, for me, it was a Type 8, right, connector. I think the other option is a Type 1, but this is a Type 8. The other thing you're going to need to tell them is what type of fuel you run, pump gas, race gas, whatever. And you need to tell them what sort of mixture you run, right? So I run 32:1. So all that information goes onto their form, and what they basically do is set this carburetor up, the SmartCarb. They set it up so that all you basically have to do is bolt it onto your bike. Now, I haven't taken anything, this is straight out of the box, so I got to open this up a little bit, but like this is the idle adjusting screw, and this top piece, this top knob, is to just fine tune the jetting a little bit. Now, SmartCarb sets all that up for you, and they say basically don't touch any of that stuff, right? As soon as you get it, you bolt it on the bike and it should be perfect, right? That's the claim. So we're going to find that out. But those are some things you need to know when you order one of these. The other thing to know is if you go for a color like I did, this is called Midas Gold, right? If you go for an optional anodized color, and you can see there's a blue one, there's different colors, right? If you go for anything other than the standard silver, then you can expect a roughly 4 weeks before they ship it, right? So just remember that, and it costs you extra for the anodizing, right? So I just happened to go for that option. And outside of that, I think that's all you really need to know when you go and order one of these. So we talked about ordering a SmartCarb and some of the things you need to input into their form when you order one of these. I wasn't going to buy one of these, mostly because of the cost. I mean, that's really the thing that was keeping me out of it for so long. But when I was going through and looking at stuff, one of the things I discovered is, and this won't apply to everybody, but they do offer a military discount if you served in the military, which I did. 10% off, right? There was no sales tax on it either because of the state I live in. So when I did all the math, I was like, wow, 10% off. That kind of takes it over the edge for me, and made the decision to purchase it. It made it viable for me. So that 10% was a big deal for me. Appreciate those guys doing that. Again, I know that doesn't apply to everybody, but it is something, if you did serve, that you should take advantage of that 10% discount. It's awesome. So why did I buy a SmartCarb and not just run with my JD jetting kit? The JD jetting kit was awesome, ran great, no issues at all. But the claims on this thing are amazing, right? And I mean, just looking at the thing, I mean, way simpler. Overall, there's not all those tubes hanging off of it. You don't have to touch it. It compensates for elevation changes. It compensates for temperature changes. So basically, once you install this carburetor, you don't have to worry about anything. So that was a big deal for me. The other thing, we're just going to open this up here. There's some claims that they make that I think, you know, they were very interesting to me when I started doing the math, right? So one of them is a 10% power gain. Now, dynoed YZ125, I've seen roughly around, let's say 35 horsepower, right? I've seen 35 and a half on the dynos. So let's say 35 horsepower, a 10% increase, that's 3.5 horsepower, right? That's a significant bump in horsepower on a 125, right? So 10%, so now we're, you know, 38.5 horsepower. I've also got an FMF exhaust on my YZ125, which we'll look at this whole setup later. That's supposed to give me a couple of horsepower. So potentially with the carburetor and the pipe, I'm running a 40 horsepower, basically fuel injected YZ125. One of the claims in here is this is better than fuel injection. And the reason they state that is because they claim that the fuel atomization in this carburetor, it atomizes finer and better than fuel injection. You also don't have an accelerator pump, so there's no other parts or electronics around it. So is it better than fuel injection? I don't know. But one of the other benefits is 30% better fuel economy. When I did the math on that, on say a 2-gallon tank, it's like adding a half-gallon bigger tank. Right now it's a 1.8-gallon tank on the YZ, but still adding nearly a half a gallon of capacity on the tank. That's a big benefit, right? And to me, that tells me this carburetor's got to be amazing at how efficient it is at getting fuel into the engine if you get a 30% greater fuel economy. That's just an amazing number, right? 50% reduction in emissions is another claim. I don't know. Emissions, you know, it's getting more important, I know, but those are some of the key benefits. And the last thing that I really am interested in is I've heard that this carburetor is the best at giving you more low-end power, smoother power, and broader power, right? All of those appeal to me on the YZ125 because the new latest model 2024, you know, from 2022 when they redesigned it, there was all this, yeah, we lost a lot of the user-friendly power in the previous version 125. I kind of want to get some of that back, right? So I'm counting on the FMF pipe giving me a broader, smoother power band with better low power. This carburetor giving me better low power. And I've got the VHM head, which we'll show you that whole setup once we get this installed, with a little bit higher compression on that head that should give me a little more bottom. I'm expecting this bike to run amazing and have that bottom end power back, to run super crisp, and give me a really amazing 125 that should compete with all the fuel injected 125s easy. So some of the other benefits of this carb, right? One is you have tool-free adjustability. So the little knob on top, you can make fine adjustments to the jetting if you need to, right? I don't know that I will, but if I have to, that knob is where you do it, right? Then of course you can adjust your idle a little bit there. Again, when you get one of these, they say don't even mess with it, right? But you have those couple of adjustments. The other thing to know about this carburetor is that it's completely sealed. The float bowl is completely sealed. So if you tip over your motorcycle, right, one way or the other, you don't have fuel spilling out of the overflows like you do on the standard carburetor, right? It has little check valves in there that keep the fuel inside, right? And that float bowl also gets pressurized, right? It gets pressurized through this set of ports up here. And that pressurization in there is what pushes more or less fuel up through the metering rod, right? So there's a lot of little magic things happening in here, but all that venting and all that special stuff happens through these little ports back here, right? And the other really important part is the metering rod. So the metering rod inside, which essentially is like the jet needle on your standard carburetor, that metering rod is also another big factor in how this thing works, right? So I think that kind of covers generally, you know, how it works and what I'm expecting out of it. Again, a thing of beauty here. So I can't wait to get this on and try it out. So a couple other things of interest to note here, and one of the benefits, one of the things I like about it is you do have one tube associated with this, and this is for your float bowl drain, right? And you know, when I store my 125, I don't like to keep fuel in it, and when you take fuel out of that stock carburetor, it's messy. You get fuel, you tend to get fuel all over. I don't know how you can avoid that, but this, you just turn the screw and drain it into a container and you're done. So I do like that benefit. I mean, it's not a big deal, but definitely a benefit. Now, one of the interesting things that they tell you to do with this is there's a little test you can do. Basically, you gently blow air into the fuel intake pipe here, this connector, and when it's setting upright, you should be able to blow air into it and it should go in there, no problem. When you flip it upside down and do the same thing, it should block your air, trying to push your air in there. So that's just kind of an interesting little test to make sure that those check valves in there work. I've done that on here and they work fine. The only other maintenance on here that you have to consider is they recommend that every 2 years there's like a $50 kit that you can buy to replace the seals and a couple of the other parts, and they recommend you do that every 2 years. Is that a real drawback? I don't think it is really, because 2 years on the stock carb, you're bound to have to do some maintenance on that too, right? So anyway, just some interesting facts about this and other benefits and features that have attracted it to me, made me attracted to this. So yeah, here's a little bit better look at the mag volt and the connector. All right, so you can see that. Now another interesting thing here, and I don't know if you can see this that well, but this isn't a round venturi, right? And this is different than a lot of the aftermarket smart carbs and the stock carb. So it's kind of like a keyhole shaped venturi, and apparently that adds a lot of the atomization benefits you get and airflow benefits you get through this carburetor. So that is another unique benefit. Another thing that's interesting about this is when you start it, basically they say don't apply any throttle at all. Just kick it over and it should start. kind of like a 4-stroke, right? You don't pump the gas. Same thing with this. You just no gas and fire it right up, right? There is a choke knob on it. Basically, if it's cold, same thing like a regular carburetor. You'd pull it up until it warms up and then push that back down. So essentially that's it. I think I've covered everything. One other thing that is important to note is the documentation is excellent, right? All this documentation that comes with it, this manual, right? And this manual is what I have up here. It's basically the same manual, right? And it's very comprehensive on how you install it and maintain your SmartCarb. So the documentation is excellent. So what are some of the drawbacks to the SmartCarb? Well, cost obviously is a big one for a lot of people, and I understand that. Totally get it. It depends on what you're after and what you can afford, for sure. There's a couple things to be aware of. One is we talked about these ports back here and how important those are, right? These ports here. And if you have an air box that has any kind of material that hangs down and blocks those, you have to trim your air box, right? So I'm gonna actually mount this on my YZ125's air box. I'm gonna take it off and put it on the table here, mount the carburetor and see what that looks like and make sure that these vents aren't being blocked. And if I have to trim any of the air box down, I will. So there's a little bit of work you might have to do there. Other than that, I think, you know, it's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot to it. If you do have to fine tune it, I think that's pretty straightforward. They recommend very, very small incremental adjustments. Now, there was one thing that almost kept me from buying this carb, and that was on their website, on SmartCarb's website, they have a manual that they call the unofficial jetting guide or tuning guide. I don't remember exactly what the name is. It's the unofficial tuning manual, tuning guide. And I read through that. It's like 60 pages. It's a long, long manual. And when I got halfway through it, I was like, wow, this thing is complicated, right? And I was really concerned about whether or not I should even invest in it. When I got down to the very bottom of that manual, there was one statement that erased all those fears, and that was, this is a precision air fuel metering device, and it's not meant to be messed with outside of those fine-tuning little adjustments. And as long as you don't mess with it, this thing should just bolt on and run, and you shouldn't have any problems. But that little unofficial guide, if you read through there, and the things that can go wrong with this thing are numerous, right? If you happen to do something wrong, right? So just something to look at, probably run through and look at it. But, you know, outside of that, documentation's great. The support is great. The communication is great. I just hope that it goes on and fits and everything hooks up and it runs just like it's supposed to. So that's what we're going to do next, is we're going to put this thing on the motorcycle. All right, this might look a little strange, but basically what I'm trying to do here is I got the SmartCarb attached how I think it's supposed to be attached on the stock YZ125 air boot, and I've just got it hanging there suspended so that I could get in here and look and see if those ports are blocked. Now, I've got a flashlight out and I looked every which way I could in there, and I cannot see the ports to tell if they're blocked. All right, and that's one of the recommendations, is to look straight down the air box and just verify that those ports aren't blocked. I can't do that on this air box. All right, so I got to make a decision. I either just run with it and see how it goes, or maybe I just trim out a little of the material that's in the air boot. I don't know. I'm thinking about that. You know, I am able to see the very, very outer edge, and it looks good to me, like it's not going to block anything. But again, I just can't see to verify whether or not there's anything blocking those upper ports on the SmartCarb. So I'm going to mess around with this a little bit more, and then probably just run with it and install it. Okay, so there's a couple things to talk about here. It went on relatively easily, but one thing that threw me was putting the cable in, the throttle cable. The carburetor came with this little sleeve, and that sleeve is not threaded and the cable is. So I called up SmartCarb, the tech support. They answered right away, which is cool. And I explained, hey, this doesn't seem like it's going in right. And they said, well, if you have a threaded cable, you need to pull out that cable guide because it's not threaded, just sitting in there. And so that kind of threw everything off, and I did not realize that. But I do now, and got it all sorted out. And everything works good. The stock cable works fine. You know, it seems to fit. It's not hitting the case anywhere. Now, this back part here, where the cable this drain tube comes out. So on that, that was a little bit tricky because this little cable or this little guide right here, it does not line up very well with the carburetor. So I had to bend it up, and then I just pushed this cable back through it to keep it up out of the way because it's just a drain tube. And since, you know, you only need it when you're draining, I can just pull that down and open up the screw okay and drain the float bowl. So that's all good, no issues. I'm gonna put the subframe on, and that should wrap this up, but just wanted to give you a good look at it, what it looks like, before I put the subframe back on. And yeah, so it's looking pretty good. Anyway, let me get the subframe on, and once that's on, I think we could start this sucker up and see if it runs. Okay guys, it's done. There it is. Carb's installed, getting ready to start it, and it looks pretty sweet. Let's have a look. We'll get some other shots of this, but yeah, I'm getting ready to start it up. SmartCarb is installed, everything by the book. Got my fuel mixture in there exactly like it's supposed to be. Gonna turn the choke on and fill up the float bowl, and fingers crossed this thing just fires up. Here goes nothing. Let's hope it starts. There's a lot of work. See what happens. Wow, 3 kicks, that's not bad. I mean, idle maybe is a little high. So I'll adjust the idle a little bit, but sounds good, seems good. Crisp, very crisp. Seems good to me. There you go, guys. SmartCarb 2024 YZ125. Good to go. 2024 YZ125 SmartCarb VHM head, FMF pipe. This thing should be sick. I'm getting it out. I can't wait.